Hey all, thank you for joining us for this week's live Q&A. The theme is World Bee Day, which is coming up May 20, and it's a time to celebrate bees and the amazing thing they do for not only us but the pollination service they provide for so many of our plants, our flowering plants that need pollination. So not only the European honeybee, Apis mellifera, but there is almost 20,000 native bee species in the world. They're really important for pollination, and today, well, World Bee Day, we're really thinking about them and the important role they play in basically not only our pollination of our food crops. We would miss, I think, a third of our food types if we didn't have our European honeybee. But if we don't have pollination at all, then things start to crumble because so many plants have evolved to rely on pollination. So hats off to the honeybees. We're going to harvest a little bit of honey while we're answering your questions. So chime in, anything about bees, beekeeping, flow hives, then just let us know. So I'm just turning this key here, which is actuating our invention, and we will also take the window cover off and have a look in at the world of bees. That's the frame we're harvesting right now. So beneath the bees' feet, the honey is going to be draining out and into our jar, while the bees are pretty much just going about their business as per usual. So my father and I put a decade into inventing this, and it's been out in the world for 9 years now, and it's a beautiful thing just to be able to harvest honey while the bees are standing on their comb surface still. Any questions, put it in the comments and we'll get to answering those. Oh, it's a nice light honey, look at that. Beautiful. Wasn't expecting that because the comb surface is quite dark, and that's because of the bees' footprints. They've been running over the surface of the honeycomb for long enough that they've actually changed the colour with their dirty little footprints after being out on the flowers. Isn't that cool? Yeah, I'm gonna have to try that. Wow, I love honey, and I just love that you get so many different flavours from the one hive. Amazing that a hive like this could pollinate 50 million flowers in a day, and we just don't have any other method of pollinating our food crops. So humans have dragged the European honeybee, Apis mellifera, all around the world with them wherever we've gone for their amazing pollinating service. And look at that gorgeous honey they make as well. That really is a bonus. If we look after the bees, they'll look after us, and we also get this extraordinary bonus of this beautiful thing we call honey to enjoy. Now this is a beautiful educational hive here. You've got the drone bee, which is the male in the hive. There's about 600 of those in a beehive like this, approximately. It does change. And then you've got the queen, which is the egg layer of the hive, and usually only one of them. And then you've got the worker bees, which there could be 50,000 of. And they work hard for their short little life of 4 to 6 weeks. And their job is to get out there, bring in the nectar, bring in the pollen. They're making honey and they're making bee bread by fermenting that pollen, by packing it into the cells with their heads, by topping it with some enzymes and honey and special sauce, and away it goes, making bee bread. And on this side of the hive we've got a nice diagram to show you where Sarah's done an amazing paint job showing you all the different parts of the bee. It's a beautiful thing. Any questions?
Yes, Cedar, everyone loving the artwork on the side of that hive and the fact that it's World Bee Day coming up. We've got a question from, I'm not sure where this person's living, but obviously somewhere really cold. Just wondering, have you ever thought about making hives that are insulated, or how can you insulate the faux hive?
So we've thought a lot about insulated hives, and it's a bit of an argument out there whether it's good or not to insulate hives as well, because bees, while they in cold climates, some people will argue you should wrap your hives in a blanket for winter to keep them warmer, and others argue no, let them be cold, let them drop properly into their hibernation state where they cluster as a ball. And the place that isn't argued in terms of insulation is under the roof. So if you're in a cold climate, then you can wrap your hive in winter if you want to, do whatever works for you, but at a minimum just put some insulation under the roof, so you can break up an old styrofoam box, or you can use an old pillow or anything like that. And the idea is you're making sure the inner cover doesn't get too cold, because you don't want condensation forming on the inner cover and dripping onto your bees in the cold climate. Whereas on the walls, it's actually quite nice if some condensation builds up, because it gives a water source for the bees. Chime in if you've got different arguments. There's a lot of beekeepers who will firmly believe one way or the other.
Oh, sounds like a song seed. I think it's Blondie, wasn't it? Anyway, London is asking, or London Buds is asking, can I put this flow hive in my garden?
Absolutely.
Like
most places in the world is great for keeping bees. So the amazing thing about a beehive is it doesn't take up very much area, yet it's harvesting from up to a 6-mile, 10-kilometre radius and bringing all of that nectar back into your hive. So you get this beautiful thing of tasting the honey from your local area without having to own land. You can put one of these on your balcony, on your rooftop. It's amazing where people keep them. And the great thing about a flow hive in particular is the harvesting equipment is all in here. Rather than taking up a room in your shed or your garage, you don't need that whole extraction line with the centrifuge and the decapping bench and all of that sieving and things like that anymore. It just flows right out here, and it's just beautiful and ready for the table. So it really is a small amount of footprint where you can get real produce and at the same time providing this pollination service. So it's a wonderful thing that I think humans really yearn to do farming and connect to producing local produce, and often people don't have land to do that. So a flow hive's a beautiful way to engage families. The UN has put out World Bee Day with Be Engaged with Youth. So their theme is to inspire the up and coming. And I think a flow hive in particular really does that because of the mesmerising waterfall of honey that comes out, and also the views through the windows that you don't normally get with other hives, where you can look in and see what's going on inside the hive. So families really appreciate it, young and old.
Right, Cedar, Paddy's tuning in from Ghana, and just saying got 2 flow hives. The first one's doing really well, and then they got another one about 7 months later. They're just wondering, so the first hive's doing great, everything's going really well. The second hive, I imagine they're in the same garden. The bees are just not moving up to the super. I'm just wondering, is there anything that they should be doing to encourage it? Because if one's going great guns and one's not, and they're right next to each other.
So if you're getting a bit impatient, I mean, the best recipe for getting honey stored in your flow frames is a good nectar flow and a lot of bees in your box. And when those two things coincide, it happens very fast. But if either of those things are out, let's say your colony's a bit weak and they're storing enough perhaps to keep themselves alive but not excess for you to share, then they won't actually get to storing in the brood box. Or there could have been drought or flood. But as you say, you've got a difference between one hive and another. And if one hive continues to outperform the other, it could be that the queen isn't virile enough, she's not laying enough eggs, and you might want to consider changing the queen. However, if things look okay, there's lots of bees but they're just not using the flow frames yet and you're getting impatient, you can scrape some wax off the top of the brood frames with your hive tool and then mash it into the comb surface. Do it on the window side, and then just watch as the bees recycle that wax in the local area, which they'll do quite quickly. You still won't get any honey stores though till you've got a lot of bees in your box and a good nectar flow to really store excess honey that you can share too. Let us know how you go.
Now, Captain Happy, what a great name, loving his beehive, is in Louisville in Kentucky. The question is, do you find vinegar is a good deterrent in the ant guards?
Oh, I can't say I've ever used vinegar in the ant guards, but let us know how you go with that. We usually use oil or a grease, like a Vaseline, and you go through a little process of cutting the foliage back, cleaning out the ants from behind the inner covers, and making sure there's no way the ants can crawl up. Brush away the ants a few times and they usually go away till next time. Often when it rains they come up out of the soil looking for homes. Now one little cheeky bee got in the jar even though I was trying to not let it. If you get a lot of bees in your jar, cover it up. Now, oops, I'll just put that back on the landing board and the bees will really lick it up. Here, I'll move that caddy out of the way so you can jump up there. It's a fun thing. You shouldn't feed honey to bees, but this is honey from its own hive. Oops. There we go. This bee can go back on the landing board there and have a look. What will happen is the other bees will lick it up really quickly. See them coming in there? So bees can survive in honey for a long time. Don't worry too much. Just fish them out, put them back on the landing board to be cleaned up. But if you get a lot of bees jumping in your jar, cover it up with a bit of kitchen wrap or wax wrap, and that'll mean that the bees can't get in. Any more questions, put them in the comments below, we'll answer them. The idea is we're talking about bees, flow hives, World Bee Day, the importance of pollination. So anything you want, chime in.
Fantastic. Cedar, I love reading these ones because it's so different to us from Black Creek Apiary here in North Florida. They had a whole lot of bees, beehives. I don't think they were just flow hives, and then some got stolen and then they rescued them, and then a week later a bear got the beehive.
Wow.
And now they've got their flow hive and they're so excited, and they just wanted to say thank you so much for the beautiful, the engineering, the packaging, the way it's presented. And I think when we hear about people in America with the bears, it just, I don't know, it's so far away from us.
Yeah, we thankfully don't have any bears coming to rip apart our hive. Apparently they really like to eat the brood down here, but they'll also have a crack at the honey too. So I've heard of people putting their beehives in old cars and the bees fly in and out the windows of the car, but the bears can't get in and rip the hive apart. So pretty interesting beekeeping. If you've got bears around, other people put electric fences to keep the bears out, but yes, we don't have anything that will rip our hives apart, thankfully.
Amelia on TikTok is wondering, how can you tell that the flow frames in the middle are ready to harvest because you can't see through the window?
So it's a great question. It's a little bit hard to tell at the moment because the bees are a bit hungry. We're just going to harvest one jar of honey today, leave the rest for the bees. Really, you probably wouldn't harvest any because you can see here there's actually no honey visible in the windows. I was harvesting that frame because I could see it on the edge. It was still full. And I don't really have a good example at the moment of honey in the windows because the bees, when they get a bit hungry, they are retracting the honey away. None there either. But this does give you a good idea of what's going on. We can tell the bees are hungry, they're not bringing in much. When they start to bring it in, you'll see the honey filling in here. And when it's full out to the edge and capped, you can be pretty sure that it's mostly capped on the inside too. There's one caveat on that. If the bees are getting hungry, they often eat directly above the brood nest in the center. So if you notice them eating away honey in the observation window, then you probably want to leave the center frames for the bees because they'll be just eating some of that right above the brood nest, and you can go ahead and harvest an edge frame if you need some honey, or you could just leave it for the bees. But this window is extremely useful. Matched up with the side windows, it's very handy because you can look in and just gauge what's going on in your hive. And if you watch it over time, you'll get a good idea of when to harvest or not. Have a look at that. You can see the open hexagons and no stored honey. And here is the same, so we certainly wouldn't be harvesting any honey from this hive today. Over here, the frame we're harvesting is totally capped. Looks very different to the frame we just looked at, where they've put a wax sheet over the top. It's like a lid on a preserving jar saying that's ready to store for the long term on the shelf.
Fantastic, Cedar. Now stock Troy, they've got their bees, they've got them in the brood box, it's all going well, the hive's level as it should be, but the bees seem to be building their comb all over the place. Any suggestions on how to fix that?
Okay, wonky comb. So some bees will go a bit wonky. So if you're doing naturally drawn comb where you're just putting in our wooden frames with the comb guide in the top, and you've installed your bees but they're going wonky or sideways on some of the frames, then what you need to do is get them back in line. So you'll need to get your hive tool, and somewhere we'll put a link in the comments to show you how to do that. But you basically get your hive tool and you chop away at the top and you bend the comb back on line. Now if it's really sideways, what you can do is cut out the sections of brood and use a couple of rubber bands that going around the frame just to hold that in place, while the bees will then connect it back onto the frame, and away you go with a straight frame. So naturally drawn comb is wonderful, I think, because you don't need to introduce other wax, or you don't need to have a plastic foundation. We don't need to spin our frame, so we don't need the wire reinforcement, so you can just leave it perfectly natural, wooden frame. The bees build as they've always done down here in the brood box, and normally they go straight enough to be serviceable. Now if they don't, as said, just get in there and fix it up. You need them to go straight. Once they got the idea, they'll follow suit with the other frames. Some people like to put foundation sheets in to guarantee they go straight, but it doesn't actually guarantee, because they sometimes will go wonky on them as well. For me, I much prefer doing a little fix up in the brood box every now and then sitting there at night tensioning wires and putting them on the jumper leads and melting the foundation sheets into each frame like I once used to.
Great, thanks Cedar. Now our fantastic social team here are running a little cute little bee diversity campaign that explores and celebrates different bee species to educate the community on why protecting our bees are so important. So the question is, Cedar, what is your favourite bee?
Well, I do love the blue banded bee here in Australia, and my sister has amazing footage of it. We'll post a link below. You can see it's got bright blue stripes, it's big and fluffy, and it gets around in the garden, loves these blue flowers. If we're lucky, we might see one if we keep a lookout. The other week we had here a teddy bear bee, which is another beautiful Australian native bee, and the blue banded bee on the same flower here, and that was a little special moment. And that's the reason why we like planting flower gardens. It's really to attract in all of the native bee species. We're not trying to increase our honey yield by planting these flowers. You have to plant acres and acres to increase a honey yield, but what it does do is provide stepping stones for those native bee species that really need more forage and more habitat because we've decimated so much habitat in the world. If we can provide pollinator areas and really be inspired to create pollinator habitat, we can give them stepping stones across the urban landscapes and perhaps help some of those species from the brink of extinction, as they can now hop from garden to garden and connect through to the next wild space and so on.
Fantastic. Cedar, Ben wants to know, are slugs a problem for bees? Ben's noticed a few entering the hive.
Well, slugs entering the hive, that's a new one.
Yeah.
Let's be cool to see some footage of that. I've never seen a slug go into the beehive. Bees are usually pretty protective of what comes in their entrance. If an ant tries to go in, no joy. If a bee tries to go in from another hive and it's not carrying the gold, it doesn't have nectar or pollen, there'll be a fight at the entrance. So unusual to hear slugs going into your hive. That's definitely a new one.
Yasmin's tuning in from somewhere in Africa and wants to know, how do you get bees for the flowhive?
So to get bees for a flowhive or any other conventional hive, you need to get bees either by ordering a nucleus off a bee breeder, which is a going little mini hive. It's about half of the frames have a bottom box of somebody else's hive, put into a little carton for transport, and then you put it in your garden where you want your hive to be. Wait for a nice warm sunny day, it could be in a week or a month, and get in your bee suit, your smoker, transfer those frames to your bottom box, look after them, and they'll grow from there. There is other ways to get going in bees. You can catch a swarm in the springtime, or you could order a package of bees, which is like an artificial swarm where a beekeeper has shaken a whole lot of bees into a box, put in a queen in a little cage, and then ship that to you in the mail, and you'll get some odd looks from your postal services. You've got this buzzing box of stinging insects being delivered to your door. Then you need to get that and shake them into your box. A bit like catching a swarm, but it's a artificial one, if you like. Or you could take a split, which is one of my favourite ways. In the springtime, if you go to Beekeepers, they often have this problem where they've got too many bees, and they'll be happy for you to take a split from one of their hives, which alleviates the tendency of that hive to swarm and gives you some frames and bees to start your colony. And if there's eggs down the cells, the workers will feed that young larvae royal jelly for its entire 11-day gestation, and it will become a queen. So the bees have the ability to raise their own queen as long as there's eggs on some of the frames that you split from another hive. You can also do what's called a bait hive, where you set your hive up 6 to 12 feet off the ground. If it's near an existing apiary like this, you'll increase your chances. If it's springtime, you really increase your chances, and the bees just might move in as a swarm goes looking for a new home. So that's called a bait hive. Easiest way is the nucleus, where you order a going little mini beehive, put it in your garden, and transfer them into your brood box, look after them, and they'll grow from there.
Great, Cedar. This is C. Rose is asking, and you with your kids who love going into the flow hives, just wondering, they'd really love to get their young kids involved. Maybe some tips and tricks for getting young kids involved to not be sort of too worried or scared about the bees, and you've done it with your kids.
It's funny, you know, you'd think that if you got stung by a bee you'd be put off, but they don't seem to be. They you know, my kids haven't got stung very much, but my son Charlie's been stung beekeeping because he wasn't wearing gloves. There's a tip: put gloves on your kids when they're beekeeping. But get a bit relaxed being around bees a lot, I guess. But my big tip is have some fun with it. Let them paint their hive, and then sell the honey at a roadside stall. So if the kids can harvest their honey and then get some real money by selling it at a roadside stall, then they'll be very motivated. Like my son is, he's got 2 hives now. He caught a swarm, he took a split, and now he wants more hives. He's saving up for Lego, and he's also going to do some fundraising with the honey as well. So that's an exciting way to get the kids involved.
Great. Lucy's asking, do you ever put wax on your brood frames? She's heard that some people say to use it because it encourages the bees to make the comb on their brood frames, even though we provide foundationless brood frames.
My experience is if you leave a space in a hive, bees will fill it with comb very fast. So you don't need to go and put wax on your wooden frames down here. All you need to do is make sure the box is full. They will pick the lowest point, being the comb guide, draw their comb from there, and usually it works out very nicely. So I wouldn't bother putting wax on your wooden frames down here. You can just let the bees do it,
Right, now Clinton's asking, wondering what that little hive is just down from you, Cedar, with the little red roof.
That's one of our pollinator houses, and that's a fundraising project that we run each year. We get the offcuts of our flow hives that build up in the corner of the factory, and we make a little kit for you to put together, and then there's bamboo that comes with it, and there's wood with holes, and you get all sorts of species of native bees using them as a pollinator hotel. So they might just go into a cell. You can see the resin in this one. That's probably the fire-tailed resin bee, which collects resin to put into a little tube like that, and it'll be raising a couple of little young in there, and it'll emerge out of that little tube, and that's all they do. They don't form a colony like the Apis mellifera does. There's only a few species of colony forming bees in the world. Most are solitary like this, and this is a great little, I guess, educational piece, a great thing for the kids to put together. So you'll find that on our website too, and you can, the best spot for it I find is under the eave of your house. Put it on the wall. The bees love it there with a little bit of shelter, so on the outside of your house but under a bit of shelter, and you'll really see a lot of bees going crazy for the habitat. But habitat in general is an important thing to do. Humans need to work out how to live in a way where we can have enough habitat to keep the matrix of life going. We are in the 6th mass extinction. A lot of bees are on that list. We're losing species we haven't even found yet, and one thing we can do about it is create habitat. So pollinator houses like this are cool, or you can just leave spaces of your yard unkept for all sorts of insects and bees to move into. And David Attenborough says we need to re-wild our world, and it's something we can do in our own backyards by just allowing the wild to provide habitat as well.
Right. So the Greg's wanting to know, do you think it would be okay? So he's got 4 separate hives. He's thinking about taking 2 frames from each of the hives, so we'll end up with 8 frames to create like a split, and then putting them into a box so that he can add the super on a lot quicker.
Yes, that can work, and we've done that a bit here because in springtime bees do breed up, and at times when we've decided we don't need a lot more hives, we just want a few more hives, we have combined frames from a number of hives into one. And that is a quick way to get your splits really going fast. However, just be mindful that you don't end up with too many queens in that split that you've made with multiple boxes, because you'll find that they'll take off and you end up with swarms in trees. We had one of our staff here, Bija, she took a box home like that. It was 3 splits combined, and that 2 of them took off into the trees and so on. So just make sure when you take those frames that there is no queen on them, or you might find that some of them will take off again. There is a chance that you get a bit of fighting as well, so you're risking that. Sometimes bees will fight when you merge them, but in general you're taking the nurse bees on the frames and putting them together, and they're usually okay with that.
Right. So then maybe it's a good time to, for Flowhive to celebrate World Bee Day, where, and also because you were talking about rewilding, we're giving away to Australia and US customers a beautiful free set of our garden tools that we have here. Hopefully sort of to encourage people to garden more and plant more habitat and forage for the bees. So check that out on the .com and the .com.au site for anyone who purchases a full Flowhive or a Flow Super that isn't already discounted. If this is confusing, just get in contact with customer support and we'll get you sorted.
Excellent. Give Trace a call if you've got any questions. And
yeah, you better show them those
she'll be
garden
happy to
tools.
help you. Here's these garden tools. They're actually a really nice set. A great present too. If you have a look at this, they come in this beautiful wax coated canvas, from organic cotton, and we have some very robust tools. You know, often the tools you buy down in the hardware store, they're just a bit flimsy and they'll snap off right there. Have a look at the quality there. It's really sturdy, hard to break. And I think amongst our staff, this is the favourite tool, the widger, which really is useful for planting and weeding. So you've got a widger, a fork, and a little trowel in a nice little package. So if you want some inspiration to jump in and start your beekeeping, then there's a little gift there for you waiting if you're in Australia or the US.
Great. It's so funny. I've of course got a set, and I didn't even know what a widger was for or how you use it. Now I feel like I don't know how I lived without my widger. It's so good for planting seedlings and seeds, and it's my all-round favourite tool at the moment, I must say.
Lovely.
So Cedar, what happens if the queen lays in the super?
Okay, if the queen lays in the super, she usually got up there somehow. So normally you've got an excluder. You can see this little black line here, which is a grid where the queen can't get through because she's too big. However, sometimes when she's small and only just mated, she might just squeeze through that excluder and end up stuck up here and laying in the flow frames. So if that happens, it's not the end of the world. You just need to move her back down under the excluder. And if you can't find her, because that can be a daunting task if you're new to beekeeping, then just shake all the bees down under the excluder, put the excluder back on, put your top box back on, and that way you'll know that the queen is then downstairs. Once you wait for any brood to emerge, so if there was eggs in there, then the longest cycle will be 26 days, being the drone bees, so wait at least 26 days, then you can harvest like normal and it won't affect the performance of the flow frames. We actually had the opportunity to show you how to do that, and we'll put a link below where we had that exact issue where the queen had gotten into the top, and we showed you how to move all the bees down to the bottom on our live stream.
Gary's tuning in from Canberra here in Australia, which can get quite cold, and he's just wondering, he just seems to have noticed that all the bees have disappeared from the super. Gary's wondering, should he be concerned, or have they just moved into the brood box?
So it'd be normal in Canberra, you're starting to get quite cold, for the bees to form a bit of a hibernation ball. Now some people will take off some of the boxes and reduce the size of their hive for a long cold winter in a cold area like Canberra. So you could go ahead and take your super off and have a look there and make sure they've got enough honey stores. If they don't, and they're a bit dry down below, there's no storage of honey on the edges, then you might need to feed them so the bees can store a bit of sugar water as a honey source for when they get hungry, so they can keep them going through a long winter. If they've got no stores up here, feeding them in the autumn is a good idea. Canberra is a good spot to keep bees. My grandfather keeps bees there and has the yellow box comes in, which is a beautiful Australian flavour of honey. I've got fond memories as a child of the yellow box honey there in Canberra and out in Queanbeyan. Isn't that a great name? Queanbeyan. But that's where my grandfather kept most of his hives. And then some also in Yarralumla.
Oh, that's so good.
He's now 97, still beekeeping.
Whoa, that's so good. We better get him on. We should get him up here one day, Cedar, and have him on live.
Yes, that's right.
C Park is asking, when was the last time this hive was harvested?
So what we're tending to do, because there's not a whole lot of honey around, is just harvest a frame or two at a time. So we were harvesting a few frames from this hive recently, probably I don't know, a few weeks, month ago, and but because we're just harvesting a few frames at a time, we're leaving some for the bees and leaving some for another show and tell as well. So hopefully in the springtime, or even during our winter here, we get the paperbarks flowering and get quite a lot of honey coming in. So that'll get exciting, and then you can get that moment where you harvest all the frames and then a week or two later they're full again. It's very exciting when that happens, but equally you have times in the season where things are a lot slower and you do have to exercise a bit of patience to get honey stores in your top box.
Right. Sean's asking, can you block off part of the super to make the bees finish off a number of frames, like towards the end of autumn? So rather than having a full super of unfinished frames, you've just got a couple of full frames.
I guess you could.
Yeah.
I haven't thought of that. I guess as a hack you could leave them in the open position. The bees couldn't use those ones, but if you leave them too long like that, they're going to start putting a lot of wax in there and it's annoying to clean out. You might need a pressure washer to clean it out later. But yeah, you can go ahead and try whatever you like. It's great. People try all sorts of different things in beekeeping and use the flavour frames in all sorts of different ways as well.
Jules is asking, Cedar, do blue-banded bees make honey?
They don't store honey like we see here. They do collect nectar and feed it to their young larvae. So we have seen them use the pollinator house, but generally they like to use mud. And at my son's school, they had built a mud brick wall and the blue-banded bees moved in. I've never seen anything like it. There was like 1,000 of them there using little holes in the mud brick wall they had made. So making mud bricks is a nice way to get some habitat, especially if you put them under shelter for the blue-banded bees here in Australia. But yes, they will collect a tiny bit of nectar and they're just feeding that to just a couple of young in a hole in some mud. Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, is extremely special and amazing because of the incredible amount of honey they store and the pollination that they do. The pollination service is now totally intertwined with our food chain. So it's a great time with World Bee Day coming up on May 20th to really think about the importance of bees, not only Apis mellifera but all of the other little native bees as well. But the European honeybee is absolutely incredible and is something that we need to continue to nurture. We need enough beekeepers to look after enough bees, to do enough pollination to keep our food system going. So becoming a beekeeper is a great thing to do.
How far away should you have a beehive from your home?
That's a good question. Now, it sort of depends on two things. One is your appetite for having bees around, and the other one is the genetics of your colony. So I've had a beehive by my door for the last 6 years. It's literally, 3 metres from my front door. And I chose a nice gentle colony to put there, one that wouldn't go stinging our guests or visitors. Now, I wouldn't put an aggressive hive that close to your front door. And when you're situating your hive, it's always good to point the entrance away as well so visitors don't get a bee unknowingly in their hair and stinging them on the head and that kind of thing. So it's if you're going to put bees quite close, then have a little think about their flight path and where it's going. And also when you get your bees, ask for nice gentle genetics.
Right, now of course you've started talking about your grandfather, Cedar. Chuck and a few others are tuning and go, wouldn't it be wonderful to have the 4 generations of the Andersons beekeepers on a future Q&A?
Yes.
Meet the Anderson beekeepers.
Got a lot of beekeepers in my family actually. So my uncles keep bees, my cousins keep bees, my sisters, my brothers. It's just been a family tradition.
Your children?
In a way. My children keep bees, yes. And my great-grandfather, he didn't keep bees as such, but he used to wild harvest them in the old pillow sack way, where he'd go and find a wild colony and jam as much of it as he could into a pillow sack, or much of the comb, and squeeze it. And you know, the invent of movable combs was a big step forward in beekeeping, because it really allowed you to preserve your colony and look after your bees.
Great. Daddy wants to know, how long do you think the super box, or how many seasons would the super box last for?
That's a great question. If you want a really long lasting box, the cedar wood is the best wood in the world for long lasting. I think it's got natural, I guess, preservatives in it that are just part of the wood, and it seems to resist mould and funguses and rot. So if you want a long-lasting box, go for the cedar. Some people don't even paint it, and they'll get a very long-lasting hive out of it. This one's an oil. Don't really recommend putting an oil finish, because after a while the oil seems to feed the mildew and it just doesn't look so good. If you do want it looking like wood, go for the outdoor decking stains. This is a couple of years old and we haven't had to touch it up yet, but keeping wood looking like raw wood outdoors, you're always fighting nature a little bit. It's trying to turn it back into the earth, so you will need to give it some TLC to maintain it.
Cedar, once you harvest the honey and you've broken open the breed, do the bees then just refill the comb with honey?
When we were inventing the flowhive, we did lots and lots of experiments, and one of those, because we'd been decapping in the workshop, or where I lived, in the shed that I lived in, it seemed natural to want to decap the honey inside the hive. So I had the crazy contraptions happening where a section of comb would move away and decap it, if you like, and there was other experiments where I was trying to use coatings that bees couldn't actually connect to try and get them to not cap it. But in the end, we worked out that the bees are clever enough to know that the honey's drained from beneath their feet. It must be like walking on a drum skin or something, where the honey is gone and they can tell, and they'll start chewing that away, recycling the wax and going through the process of refilling it with nectar and producing their honey. So it was a real win, knowing that the bees can just work that out themselves.
May's asking, Cedar, what's the best thing to put in your bottom tray?
So if you've got hive beetles in your area, then you can use some cooking oil. You don't need to fill it up, you just need to cover the lower surfaces of your tray, and that way when bees fall through the screen from being chased around the hive, when hive beetles fall through the screen from being chased around the hive, they'll go down through that screen and they will die in that oil, because it clogs up their breathing apparatuses. So you can use soap and water. Quite a lot of detergent and water does work too, but it doesn't last quite as long as the oil. So to do that, you'd put a little bit of water in there, and then you'd squeeze your detergent bottle like a couple of runs through every segment of your tray, and then put that in, and you'll find that can catch beetles as well. It's less messy than oil, but doesn't last as long, and also might, depending on what time of year it is, might end up with more condensation in your hive from having a big tray of water underneath it. So for that reason, we mostly recommend cooking oil in the tray for catching beetles. If you don't have beetle issues, then you don't need to put anything in the tray at all.
Great. Do the different coloured honeys have different sugar contents?
Yes, there'll be different ratios of fructose to glucose, different sugars in the honey, and that will change the honey's properties a lot, and will also determine on when and if the honey will go candied. Most honeys will go candied, forming sugar crystals. Some will actually form inside the hive into sugar crystals, but mostly they'll form in the jar at some point. Some honeys will be literally weeks after you've harvested it. Other honeys might last for years as liquid honey like this before going candy, and that's usually the ratios of the different sugars in the honey.
Right. Do you need council permission to have a beehive in your yard?
Not in most places. So some councils have restrictions on how many you can have, and there is the very rare place where they say no beekeeping allowed, but it's pretty unusual. So you can check with your local council as to whether there's any issues with keeping bees. But one requirement is, if you're in Australia here and many countries, is you register your hives. So there's a small fee to pay to join the DPI here in New South Wales, and in other states there's a different governing body, but basically you make a small contribution that helps manage pests and disease, and you get updated information, and it is a requirement of beekeeping to register. Pretty small on there because we're often doing photo shoots, but you can write your number on the side of the hive, and that's a mandatory identifier for your hive equipment.
Cedar, will the honey flow work in colder climates? This person lives in the UK, so just wondering, will it flow out of the flow hive?
Absolutely. So in the very beginning, there was a lot of people in the UK had decided that the flow hive won't work in the cold climate, and I'm not sure why, but that got propagated a lot, even though it wasn't true. We had people harvesting up in Canada in our original promo video in 2015. Nevertheless, it's a bit of, I guess, advice or an idea that gets passed around that it won't work in the UK, but of course it does. We've got lots of beekeepers there in the UK. Have a look at Jamie Oliver. He's got lots of flow hives and makes great videos with it. And I think the reason why it works just about anywhere is the time you're harvesting is the warmer times anyway. So obviously if you harvest in winter and it's very cold, you're not normally harvesting in winter, you're usually leaving it for the bees, but if you are, it'll just come out slower. It might take a couple of hours to fill your jar instead of half an hour like this.
Right. Lynette wants to know, do you remove the queen excluder so the queen can get access to the honey during winter?
We don't here, because as far as where there's a long cold winter, here we are in the hours all year round, so we can leave the hive in this configuration all year and we don't have to change it. However, in cold climates it's common to either take out the queen excluder, which is that grid between these two boxes prior to winter, which allows your hibernating bee ball to move up through the hive and consume any honey in any top boxes. So that is a thing you might do in a colder climate, but ask your local beekeepers and see whether your area is cold enough to worry about that. Other things they might do is change the size of the hive. Let's say they had an extra brood box or an extra super on here, they might reduce the size of the hive by taking a couple of boxes off and allowing the bees just to hibernate in a smaller area. It'd be easier for them to do that than in a really big hive.
So just a couple of people asking, do we ever feed our bees here in the winter, and if so, what do we feed them?
I never do, it's pretty rare, but my sister will sometimes feed some bees that are in need. Let's say she's been taking some splits and they're really not getting on their feet very quickly because there's not much around. She might decide to feed them some sugar water. I generally don't. I just rely on there always being enough flowering for the bees to get going and on their feet. Other parts in the world, there's a few reasons why people will feed their bees. One is prior to winter, if there's not enough stores for a long cold winter ahead, let's say you've got many months of snow and your bees are pretty dry, there's not enough honey stored for them to last, in which case they might feed a thick syrup by 2-to-1 ratio, 2 parts sugar, 1 part water, cook that up in a pot and put that in any type of feeder you like. You can make an easy one under the lid here, Ziploc bag, pour the solution in, do it up, poke some pinholes in it, put it on top of the inner cover and take that plug out under here, and the bees will then come up through that hole and feed on that. So that's storing honey prior to winter. In a thick syrup, the bees will store as if it's honey. It's not as good as honey for the bees, but it's better than nothing. And the other reason beekeepers will feed is to stimulate their colony to get going earlier in the season. And they'll use a thin syrup, 1:1, sugar to water, and that simulates nectar and will stimulate the queen to start laying more eggs. So they start the beekeeping season with a bigger colony and therefore store more honey in the season. So that'll be something that the commercial operators might do.
Great. This is Luigi's asking, just do we, your take on native bees, and do you advocate and collaborate with conservationists to improve ecosystems? And it's kind of tying in a bit because we're getting a lot of people also then saying, again, I know you've already answered this, Cedar, but what is that tiny box with the red lid on it?
Yes, we do a lot of collaborating and support for bees and support for habitat. It's what keeps us going. We don't only want to be, selling our invention. I mean, promoting people getting into bees is great, but I want to take it further than that. So what many of the people that are attracted to work here at Flowhive are inspired by is the things that we like to do in the world to support bees, pollinators and habitat. So we've been doing that all the way through from the start, and the little pollinator house was one of our early fundraisers for that actually, and we're still keeping it going. We donate 100% of profits, actually 100% of revenue of this product to advocate and support bees. So many little projects. We started off doing micro grants to people doing bee corridors and people doing school projects and people doing tree plantings, and to tend to put the beekeeping and it to plant. So it's part of our mission is to support bees, and in doing so we create a lot of happiness about it to really write on our watch. So yes, we are very passionate about a wall in our tea room. We're making our cup of tea in the morning. We're supporting.
Yeah, it sure is. Thanks, Cedar. Dee Dreed picked up a nuke on Saturday, and it's going to be a couple of hours drive away. Just wondering, should they let them sit in the nuke for a day to calm down before they move them into their Flowhive 2 plus, or just put them straight in?
You can go either way. They'll be fine either way, but with their nucleus you've got that advantage of you can put it there and wait a week or 2 weeks or a month before you put them in. So you can wait till when you're ready, you've got your bee suit, you've got your smoker, you've got your gloves, and you can then give them a little bit of smoke and then transfer the frames into your bottom box, put the rest of the frames in, look after them, and they'll grow from there. We've got plenty of video and whole in beekeeping. Gets rave reviews and is an amazing fundraiser as well.
Right. Painters asking, just finished painting a design on their brother's Flowhive and ready to swap it out from a standard hive. Just wondering, would there be any issues with the sensory change for the bees going from a standard like Langstroth into a Flowhive? Apart from probably feeling fabulous.
Yes. Not that I know of. The bottom boxes are just the same. The only difference is you're putting our invention box on top, really, and then there's some other bells and whistles here to help you as a beekeeper. But as far as the bees are concerned, it's a wooden box, and what goes on around the edges they're probably not that concerned with.
Best way to protect beehives from fire ants?
So I haven't heard of fire ants or any types of ants bothering bees. They bother us cosmetically because they climb up and they get behind these windows, so that's the reason why we have the ant guards, and we can put some attention into brushing them out of under the roof or behind the covers and things like that. But fire ants are an invasive species here in Australia, and they seem to be working their way down the eastern seaboard, and I think they're just more of a problem for humans because they hurt a lot when you get bitten, and they also do damage to other species as well. So no issues with fire ants beekeeping. You've got a jumping ant here. This is one of our native species, and they really hurt. I'll just try and pick it up for you without getting bitten. Just lost it. But the jumping ants are they're called jumping ants because when they get a bit upset, they start jumping around a lot, and if you accidentally step on one of their nests, you know about it because you get a lot of stings on your foot. And yeah, not so fun as jumping ants, but they're around everywhere.
Great. A couple of questions maybe for ask.com. And if you've got anything, just always call or chat or send us a note. We'll always get back to you from customer support to let you know about that. Our fabulous customer support team, that is.
Well, we've got a couple of naughty bees. We've had the lid off this for a long time, and the bees are a bit hungry. Surprised we haven't got more, but I'm going to fish that one out, put that one back on the landing board if I can. Did we get it? Beautiful. And you'll see those other bees will just clean it up. It's not really a big issue, so don't worry too much, just fish them out. And if you do get a lot of bees going in to your jar, then make sure you cover it up with some wax wrap or some kitchen wrap.
What's it taste like today, Cedar?
You know, it actually tastes like the macadamia honey, which is, it doesn't have a really strong flavour here or there, and you can see quite a lot of it down here in the farmland that's cropping, and it comes in the springtime. It's mixed with something else because it's got a darker colour, but it's, yeah, the honey is, what would you describe it as? It's a pretty run-of-the-mill normal honey, the macadamia, and doesn't have strong floral notes or malty undertones. It's just something that, if you imagine honey, you would think of macadamia honey.
Oh, nice. Delicious. Cedar, and there's a few people who get this sort of wondering how come the bees don't put brood into the super part? Like how does it all work, basically?
So down here you've got your queen. It's this scented bee here. It's a bit bigger. Amazing artwork here by Sarah. She's an incredible artist, and she's done this beautiful drawing to illustrate the size and the different characteristics of the bees. So World Bee Day coming up on the 20th, so we are loving the Apis mellifera painting here. The queen, she's a bit longer and a bit bigger, and she can't get through the excluder, which is between these two boxes, so that keeps your queen down the bottom. She's down there laying eggs, and she won't get up and lay in your flow frames. Now, often queens won't lay in flow frames anyway, but it's there as a precaution. If you want to experiment with no excluder between the boxes, go ahead. Some queens will lay in the flow frames though, so you'll need to monitor that. But if she doesn't, then she probably won't.
Great. Thomas is saying, just got a problem, and you talked a little bit about moisture before, Cedar, having a few problems with moisture in the super. They can see it through the viewing windows. They've tried putting a small shim under the lid and make sure the bottom door is in the correct position. Is there anything they can do to reduce moisture and prevent mould that's starting to form on their flow hive? I'm not sure where they are.
Okay, so it's a very wet time here. We've got a lot of moisture going around everywhere. It's pretty soggy. But as things get colder, and if you do have a high humidity or moisture content, it's been raining and so on, and it's cold, then it's a natural thing to get condensation forming on cold surfaces. So it's normal to have condensation. One thing that with a flow hive is you can see it, whereas a conventional box you can't. So you open the windows, you can see the condensation. Now it is a water source for bees in those colder climates. I wouldn't worry too much about the condensation. When the bees build up enough, then you'll find that'll go away. You could reduce the size of your colony if they're really not using the box at all, and just keep them as a smaller colony till they're ready to put the super on, and that way you won't have to look at any condensation. If it's warm enough and the bees are able to get up there and maintain that space, they'll eventually build up like you see here in the window, and your condensation issues should go away. But as said, it's not really a cause for concern. In the colder climates where condensation is an issue, it's when it drips from the inner cover. So if you've got a long cold winter ahead, then put some insulation under here, break up an old styro box or any sort of foam insulation under the roof will limit condensation forming on the underside of the inner cover. You don't want any drips dripping onto your bees in those cold, damp times.
See, I know this is a little tricky one to answer, but basically how long does it take to get honey in the flow hive, and how many jars of honey can you get out of the super?
So it's can get really exciting sometimes, where you harvest all of these frames and then a couple of weeks later they're all full again. Now that's typically springtime. All around the world, the springtime is generally the time when you get the most honey coming in. Other times of year you can get some good flows, but on the flip side, you can also sometimes do a whole season without much honey storage, and that could be due to a colony not really performing that well. There's not enough eggs being laid. Perhaps your queen is a bit old and she's running out of steam, or perhaps you've got a chalk brood issue or some kind of pathogen issue down here, or perhaps there was just not enough flowers to stimulate your queen to lay a lot of eggs, and you really didn't get enough enough eggs laid to build up your colony, and you didn't get enough nectar coming in to store honey in an entire season. So a week is the fastest we've seen a box fill up here. In Canada, some people claim a day, which is just hard to believe. I've never seen anything like that. Fill a full box in a day. But generally, you're waiting a few months to get stores in your flow frames. One of the important ingredients in beekeeping to get your honey stores is patience. Like any kind of farming, you have your good seasons, you have your bad ones, and so on. As to how much honey you get one of these jars full for each frame in the hive, which is amazing, isn't it? There's so much honey from a single frame. That's a lot of honey to take back to the table. I'm going to show you how to finish the honey harvest now. I insert this into the top slot now, all the way to the back till it stops, and then I just turn the handle like that, and that's it. You've now pushed the cells back into the cell-formed position. The bees will go through their process of ripping off the capping, waxing them up, reforming them, putting their nectar in. The whole process starts once again. You can even see some bees starting work on that right now. Leave the key there in that position for a minute or two just to make sure all the parts get pushed nicely down. And in the meantime, we can then pack up your little honey tube, which is really the only messy bit. There used to be a lot to do when you'd finished harvesting in the conventional way. There's a whole decapping bench to clean up, there's an extractor to wash, there's buckets, there's everything. And now we've just got this to clean, which is a joy really, because you can taste the spoils of the amazing honey. So I then turn it back to a 90 and out, put the little cap in, don't forget that. There's a little reminder we've put there. If you can't get the cap in, it's because you've forgotten to reset the frame. So we were doing that when we're in our prototype phase, and we thought we'll just build that little reminder into the cap. Now it's a case of taking away your beautiful jar of honey and putting your hive back together. Don't forget to put on the windows, because otherwise what you'll find is too much sunshine could come in. Now we've had a lot of wet here, so this is actually a little bit tight, which is typical. Wood will swell in the wet, so you might need to work a little bit harder just to get that to close. There we go. Now, friendly bees, they didn't come running at me. Where did I put the cover? Somewhere here. Now, oh, condensation, here it is here. You can see some there. Not really an issue for your bees, but I've left that off, so this has gotten a little bit colder and moisture's now condensing on the inside there. But if you put your covers back on, that'll keep that window glass that little bit warmer. We'll close up these hives. Got time for one more question. Look at this artwork, isn't it beautiful? You've got the life cycle of the bee here, and the larvae going through its metamorphosis, and then you have the 3 types of bee in Apis mellifera, or the European honeybee.
Yeah, we've had a few people saying, Cedar, can you buy our flow hives pre-painted?
You can't. You're going to have to get out your artistic skills if you want a hive like this. Make it fun. Look at this one. This is a beautiful artwork here, where Bella's done this beautiful. It almost just disappears into the garden, this hive. It's very cool. So World Bee Day, May 20th. If you haven't already, jump on our socials and vote for your favourite bee. And it's just a piece of nice education there, because it's not obvious to a lot of people that there's more than one type of bee in the world, but there's almost 20,000, and they are so cool when you look at the imagery of the different bees in the world. There's a lot of native solitary bees, so World Bee Day is about appreciating not only the Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, but all of the native bee species that make the world go round. And it's super important for us to look after the bees, which means looking after habitat, which means looking after all of the species that make up the matrix of life that we all depend on. Thanks for tuning in and asking all your great questions. If you've got answers to other people's questions, keep chiming in. It's wonderful to see a global community helping each other answer questions from all corners of the globe. So thank you, and see you again, same time next week.